Have you ever been underestimated? Pushed aside, silenced, and left for nothing? Tonight, we witness the story of a woman who was supposed to disappear into the shadows. But instead, she returned and set the world on fire. This is the story of Emma Weston. And it's a comeback you'll never forget. The night was supposed to belong to Andrew Weston. The spotlights lining the crimson carpet bathed him in a glow that he mistook for glory. Cameras clicked like machine guns, their staccato rhythm feeding his ego as he adjusted the lapels of his designer tuxedo. On his arm clung Zara, his new mistress, 23, draped in a glittering silver gown that revealed more than it concealed. She tossed her hair back and gave the paparazzi the coy smile she had practiced in front of the mirror 1,000 times. To Andrew, it was the perfect tableau, the powerful financier and his youthful conquest. Triumphant in public, he relished it. For months, Andrew had prepared for this moment. The International Film Gala was not merely a cultural event. It was the intersection of wealth, fame, and influence. Here, reputations could be forged with a single photograph splashed across tomorrow's headlines. He wanted the world to see he had traded up, that his life was bigger, shinier, freer without his ex-wife dragging him down. Every camera flash seemed to confirm his narrative. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That's Andrew Weston. Is that the girlfriend? She's half his age. Didn't his wife just disappear? The murmurs made Andrew's grin widen. He thrived on scandal as long as he was the one controlling it. He thought tonight would cement his place as a man untouchable. But destiny rarely follows the script written by arrogant men. The rumble began faintly, almost lost beneath the chaos of reporters shouting questions. At first, people assumed it was part of the evening spectacle. Maybe fireworks, maybe a cinematic stunt. But as the sound grew louder, throats tightened, and eyes tilted skyward. Above the glittering hotel facade, a private jet with a sleek black tail insignia descended slowly toward the nearby landing strip, reserved for heads of state and billionaires. The roar of its engines drowned the gossip, commanding silence. Even the most jaded socialites turned their heads. Andrew's smirk faltered. He had not arranged any surprise arrivals. He tugged Zara closer, whispering through clenched teeth, "Keep smiling." Yet his eyes darted nervously toward the landing lights. Something was wrong. The jet's wheels touched down with a hiss, rolling to a stop not far from the red carpet barricades. A convoy of black SUVs glided into formation, headlights piercing the night. Security men in tailored suits stepped out, forming a protective corridor. The crowd's anticipation thickened like the humid air before a thunderstorm. Every camera swung away from Andrew. Every microphone dropped from Zara's painted lips. All eyes locked on the jet's polished stairway, lowering to the ground. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to freeze. Then the cabin door opened. A pair of heels struck the metal steps with deliberate grace. A figure emerged, her silhouette framed against the cabin lights. The gown she wore shimmered in midnight velvet, hugging her body, yet flowing with an elegance no camera could fully capture. The first flash bulbs erupted, frantic, desperate. Photographers shouted, clawing for the perfect shot. It was Emma Weston. The wife Andrew had discarded, the woman he had mocked as powerless, the pregnant mother he believed would vanish quietly into obscurity. But she was not broken, not hidden. Tonight she was radiant, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly as though to remind the world she carried more than pain. She carried legacy. Gasps erupted. That's Emma. She's glowing. Oh my God, look who's next to her. Because Emma was not alone. Behind her descended Alexander Blackwell, the reclusive billionaire CEO whose name alone shifted markets. Tall, composed, his presence radiated authority. He did not merely escort her. He offered his arm. His protective glance leaving no doubt. This was not charity. This was an alliance. A message to every investor, every paparazzo, every rival. Emma Weston was not abandoned. She was chosen. The chaos was instant. Cameras blinded. Voices screamed. Zara's smile cracked into panic. Andrew's jaw tightened as rage flushed his face crimson. The woman he swore would beg to return had arrived stronger than ever. Stepping out not from a taxi or the shadows, but from a billionaire's private jet, escorted like royalty. Reporters surged forward, questions overlapping into a wall of noise. "Emma, how do you feel? Are you and Mr. Blackwell together?" "Andrew, care to comment?" Andrew froze. For the first time in years, the stage was no longer his. He reached for Zara's hand, but she slipped slightly, her eyes glued to the spectacle unfolding before them. He tried to laugh, to shrug it off, but no one was watching him anymore. Emma paused at the foot of the stairs, lifting her chin. The years of humiliation, the loneliness, the whispers that she was finished, all of it burned away under the blaze of cameras. Tonight, she wasn't just surviving, she was declaring war. Alexander placed his hand lightly at the small of her back, guiding her toward the red carpet. The photographers nearly toppled the barricades. Zara hissed at Andrew, "Why didn't you warn me?" He had no answer. His empire of arrogance was crumbling in real time, one flash at a time. The crowd parted as Emma took her first step onto the carpet. Her eyes locked with Andrew's across the chaos. She didn't flinch, didn't falter, didn't bow her head. She smiled, slow, deliberate, devastating. And in that smile was a promise that what Andrew feared most was only beginning. Emma Weston was never meant for the world of flashing cameras and million-dollar contracts. She came from a quiet suburb in Pennsylvania, the daughter of a school teacher and a small-town mechanic. Her childhood was modest but warm. She grew up believing in the strength of family, in the dignity of hard work, and in a kind of love that promised forever. When she first met Andrew Weston, he was everything her world had never seen. Polished, ambitious, and intoxicatingly confident. She was only 24 then, working as a junior publicist for a small PR firm that handled local events. Andrew was 30, freshly promoted at a Wall Street investment firm, already carrying himself like he owned the skyline. The first night they met at a networking cocktail party, he noticed her fumbling with her notepad, trying to keep up with a swarm of clients. He leaned in with that disarming smile of his and said, "Don't look so nervous. Everyone's bluffing here anyway." She laughed, a soft, nervous laugh that would later become the sound he said he loved most. For Emma, Andrew was dazzling. He made her believe she could belong to a bigger world. For Andrew, Emma was a blank canvas, innocent, malleable, and eager to believe in him. Within months, he swept her into his orbit. Candlelit dinners at rooftop restaurants, surprise weekend getaways to the Hamptons, whispered promises that he would give her the life she deserved. And Emma, with her tender heart, believed every word. When Andrew proposed, Emma thought her fairy tale had begun. She left her modest job without a second thought when Andrew told her, "You don't need to work anymore. I'll take care of us." At first, it felt romantic. She imagined herself building a family, creating a warm home while Andrew built his empire. She traded her career for his dreams, convinced she was part of something bigger. The early years were sweet, or at least they seemed so. Their wedding at a Manhattan ballroom was covered in society pages. Emma, radiant in lace, Andrew standing tall with his arm around her as if she were a prize he had conquered. They moved into a luxury condo overlooking Central Park. Emma filled it with love. Home-cooked meals, fresh flowers, little touches of warmth that Andrew never seemed to notice. He was too busy working, chasing deals, hosting late-night meetings. But Emma never complained. She told herself that this was what successful marriages looked like in New York. She told herself that the loneliness was temporary, that the endless waiting for him to come home was the price of his ambition. When he brushed off her questions about late nights smelling faintly of perfume, she swallowed her doubt. When he dismissed her suggestions about starting her own project, saying, "Why bother? You've got everything you need," she forced a smile. Her silence was her sacrifice, and it was killing her. By the time Emma became pregnant, she thought it would be the miracle to bring them closer. She had dreamed of a child, of holding a tiny hand, of giving the same kind of love her parents had once given her. She imagined Andrew softening, spending evenings at home building a nursery together. For a brief moment, when she told him the news, his eyes lit up. He kissed her belly and said, "We're going to be unstoppable." She believed him. But reality was cruel. Pregnancy only widened the distance. Andrew grew colder, more distracted. He spent more nights out, dismissing her worries with lines like, "I'm doing this for us," or, "Don't be so dramatic." And then the whispers began. Friends sending her screenshots of Andrew photographed with a mysterious young woman. Social media posts of him at exclusive clubs, his arm draped casually around someone who wasn't his wife. At first, Emma wanted to believe it was nothing. But the evidence piled up, undeniable, merciless. The breaking point came one night at a gala. 6 months pregnant, swollen feet aching in borrowed heels, Emma arrived at Andrew's side only to realize the whispers were true. He didn't just have a mistress. He paraded her. The younger woman lingered nearby, smirking, whispering into Andrew's ear while Emma stood forgotten in the corner, a decorative afterthought. She heard the laughter, saw the pitying eyes. And then she heard Andrew himself say to a group of men, "She'll beg to come back. Women like her can't survive without me." Emma's heart shattered in that moment. She left early, slipping out through the back entrance so no one would see her tears. Alone in the back seat of a taxi, she clutched her stomach as if shielding her unborn child from the humiliation. She thought she would suffocate under the weight of betrayal. That night, she packed a single suitcase, grabbed her prenatal vitamins, and disappeared from Andrew's glittering world. For weeks, no one saw her. Rumors swirled that she had gone back to her parents in Pennsylvania, that she was hiding out in shame, that Andrew had cut her off financially and left her destitute. The truth was simpler but sadder. Emma rented a small apartment far from Manhattan, furnished with little more than a second-hand couch and a mattress on the floor. She cooked cheap meals, spent long nights crying into her pillow, and wondered how she had become a ghost in her own story. She walked alone to her prenatal appointments, clutching her coat tighter to hide her growing belly, because she could not bear the thought of strangers recognizing her as Andrew Weston's discarded wife. And yet, even in her darkest days, a flicker of resilience remained. She whispered to her unborn child, "We'll be okay. Mama's not weak. We'll rise again." Those words became her prayer. When the message came, "Miss Weston, your jet is ready," Emma thought it was a cruel joke. She almost deleted it. But something inside her, the same stubborn pride that had carried her out of Andrew's gala, made her pause. And when she finally stepped onto that private jet, when Alexander Blackwell extended his hand, it was as if the universe itself was answering her whispered vow. Emma Weston was no longer just the woman Andrew had broken. She was the woman about to rise. And the man who believed she would crawl back to him was about to learn just how wrong he was. The International Film Gala had always been more than just a celebration of cinema. For New York's elite, it was the battlefield where image was currency and perception was power. The crimson carpet unfurled like a river of blood across the city's most iconic hotel. Its edges lined with velvet ropes and flashing bulbs. The air was sharp with the bite of early autumn. Yet the heat from the spotlights made the evening feel like summer. Everywhere one looked, excess reigned. A fleet of Rolls-Royces and limousines discharged celebrities draped in gowns worth more than most homes. Jewel tones sparkled against the backdrop of glittering chandeliers suspended from temporary towers. Photographers shouted the names of A-list actors, their lenses desperate to capture the most dazzling angles. Reporters narrated live feeds to millions watching online. And here comes the star of the year's biggest box office hit. That's the designer of the season's most anticipated collection. But beneath the glamour, tension simmered. The gala wasn't just about films. It was about who could outshine whom, who wore the most daring dress, who arrived on whose arm, who would dominate the headlines tomorrow morning. For Andrew Weston, this night had been meticulously choreographed. He wanted to command the carpet the way a general commands a parade. From the moment he stepped out of his limousine with Zara clinging to him like a trophy, he acted as though the world belonged to him. The cameras flashed, the journalists surged, and he basked in the chaos like a king at coronation. Zara played her part well, or so she thought. She tilted her chin, flashing her diamond necklace as though she'd earned it, letting her gown slit expose one perfect leg at a time. Her laughter tinkled in rehearsed notes, landing exactly when Andrew cracked a smug joke for the reporters. "It's an honor to be here," he boomed into microphones. "Tonight, we celebrate art, but let's be honest, it's also about the future, and the future belongs to the bold." His arm tightened around Zara's waist as if she were his evidence of boldness. But as they strutted deeper into the blaze of cameras, the crowd began to shift. First subtly, then unmistakably. Heads turned, necks craned, whispers surged like a tide changing direction. Photographers stopped calling Andrew's name. Their shutters began to click elsewhere because the spectacle no one expected was unfolding behind them. From the private terminal, a convoy had arrived. Sleek SUVs, tinted windows, engines humming with quiet authority, the kind of entrance reserved for royalty or the highest echelons of power. And when the jet stairway had descended, when Emma Weston appeared with Alexander Blackwell by her side, the gala ceased being about films or gowns or Andrew's parade. It became about her. The crowd parted like water. Guests who minutes earlier had been fawning over Andrew now stumbled forward to catch a glimpse. "That's Emma Weston," someone gasped. "But she looks incredible," another whispered. "Is that Alexander Blackwell with her?" The name alone sent chills down spines. Alexander rarely appeared in public. He was the billionaire who shunned interviews, who controlled industries from behind closed doors. For him to walk the red carpet and with Emma, Andrew's ex-wife, was seismic. The scene turned feverish. Emma's velvet gown shimmered under the spotlights, its deep hue contrasting perfectly with her luminous skin. Her hair, styled in soft waves, caught the light with every step. But it wasn't just the dress or the styling. It was her presence. She walked with a poise that silenced whispers, her hand lightly brushing her rounded belly as though to remind the world she carried not shame but life. Alexander was the anchor at her side. Tall, commanding, tailored to perfection in a midnight tuxedo, he exuded the calm of a man who didn't need to fight for attention because attention bent toward him naturally. His hand rested protectively at the small of Emma's back, guiding but never overshadowing. The message was clear. Emma Weston was not alone. She was shielded, respected, elevated. Andrew's jaw tightened as the cameras abandoned him. He gripped Zara's hand too hard, causing her to wince. He hissed under his breath, "Smile. Don't you dare stop smiling." But it was useless. No one cared anymore. Zara's sequin dress suddenly looked cheap in comparison to Emma's effortless elegance. Andrew's bravado melted into a sheen of sweat under the merciless lights. The reporters surged like wolves scenting blood. "Emma, Emma, over here. Mr. Blackwell, is this your first public appearance together? Andrew, do you have a comment on your ex-wife arriving with one of the world's most powerful men?" Andrew tried to step forward to reclaim the spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice strained. "Tonight is about cinema, not." But his words were swallowed by the roar of cameras and the deafening call of Emma's name. Emma paused at the beginning of the carpet. She lifted her chin and allowed herself a smile. Not the timid, dutiful smile of a wife playing her role, but a smile of quiet triumph. A smile that said she had endured hell and returned stronger. The crowd erupted. Photographers practically climbed over one another, desperate to capture the image. Emma Weston, radiant, with Alexander Blackwell at her side. Zara tugged at Andrew's arm, whispering, "Do something." But Andrew stood frozen, his facade crumbling. The man who believed he could humiliate his wife into silence now found himself humiliated, reduced to a footnote in her comeback. The atmosphere shifted palpably. The red carpet no longer belonged to Andrew. It belonged to Emma. The very air seemed to change temperature as she walked forward. Every step measured, every glance calculated. Even celebrities, the ones who were supposed to command the night, turned to watch her. One actress muttered to her companion, "Forget the premiere. This is the story." Emma's eyes swept across the crowd, then landed squarely on Andrew. She did not waver. She did not blink. Her gaze was steady, her smile deliberate. It was a silent confrontation, one that said more than words ever could. And in that moment, under 1,000 flashing lights, the balance of power shifted, and Andrew Weston realized he was no longer the king of this story. Andrew Weston had always believed in his own myth. To him, life was a stage and he was its central character. The self-made financier, the man who turned ambition into fortune, the kind of figure Wall Street profiles called a visionary. He relished the headlines, the interviews, the applause at galas. But what he loved most was the power of control. Control over deals, over investors, over appearances, and most of all, over the people closest to him. With Emma, he had once played the role of charming husband. But even in those early days, Andrew saw her less as a partner and more as a prop. She was his polished accessory, the supportive wife who made him look respectable at investor dinners. He told her when to smile, when to speak, when to fade into the background. She complied because she loved him. And Andrew mistook her love for weakness. When she became pregnant, Andrew's arrogance only deepened. He saw her condition not as a blessing, but as leverage. "You'll stay now," he thought smugly, "because no woman would walk away when she's carrying a child." In private, he rolled his eyes at her cravings, mocked her swollen ankles, and dismissed her fears. In public, he painted himself as the devoted husband. Every kiss for the cameras was strategy. Every hand on her belly was performance. Behind closed doors, his contempt grew. Enter Zara. Zara was everything Emma was not, at least in Andrew's shallow eyes. Young, flashy, willing to flatter him endlessly. She was a social media influencer desperate for status, the kind of woman who measured self-worth in designer labels and likes. To Andrew, she was a distraction, a shiny toy that reminded him he was still desirable. To Zara, Andrew was a ticket out of obscurity. Together, they fed off each other's vanity. Andrew paraded Zara around, not because he loved her, but because she made him feel untouchable. She laughed too loudly at his jokes, clung to his arm with practiced adoration, and whispered lines that kept his ego bloated. "You're the smartest man in the room. They all envy you. You deserve better than Emma, dragging you down." Zara knew how to stroke his pride, and Andrew rewarded her with gifts. A Cartier bracelet, a Porsche, a condo in her name. Each expense was a transaction, her loyalty for his indulgence. But loyalty built on greed was as fragile as glass, and Andrew never noticed the cracks. His arrogance blinded him. He didn't see that Zara rolled her eyes behind his back, mocking his aging hairline to her friends. He didn't hear the whispers at events where industry veterans muttered that Andrew had traded dignity for cheap thrills. He didn't sense that the very people laughing with him were also laughing at him. To Andrew, he was still the center of the universe, and anyone who disagreed was simply jealous. The night of the gala, he strutted with Zara on his arm, convinced they would own the evening. He pictured the headlines: Andrew Weston moves on, new love stuns at red carpet. He rehearsed sound bites in his head, imagining how he would spin questions about Emma. "I wish her the best," he would say with faux generosity while Zara pressed closer for the cameras. He thought he was scripting his own victory. But arrogance breeds blindness. He didn't see the storm approaching. He didn't know Emma had chosen that very night to return. He didn't anticipate Alexander Blackwell stepping into the picture. And he certainly didn't imagine that his ex-wife would appear stronger, more radiant, and more untouchable than ever. When Emma stepped out of that jet, Andrew's entire performance collapsed. But instead of humility, he doubled down on arrogance. His jaw locked, his fists clenched, his voice hissed through gritted teeth. "Smile, Zara. Don't you dare stop smiling." He believed he could still control the narrative if he just forced it hard enough. But control was slipping through his fingers like sand. Inside, Andrew seethed. He convinced himself Emma had orchestrated her appearance to humiliate him. He muttered curses under his breath, blaming her for stealing his moment. "She couldn't survive without me," he thought bitterly. Even as cameras abandoned him for her, he told himself Alexander Blackwell was just using her, that Emma was still the same powerless woman he'd left behind. It never occurred to him that she had risen beyond him. His arrogance wouldn't let him see it. Zara felt the shift, too. Her smile cracked, her grip on Andrew's arm loosened. She hissed, "Why didn't you warn me about this?" Andrew snapped back, "Because it's nothing, just a stunt. Stay focused." But even Zara could sense the tide turning. Her eyes followed Emma, luminous and untouchable. And for the first time, she wondered if being Andrew's arm candy was enough. Andrew's arrogance left him blind to danger. But it also made him crueler. He whispered venom to Zara when no one could hear. "Don't embarrass me. You owe me this. Without me, you're nothing." His words, dripping with the same disdain he once used on Emma, revealed the truth. Andrew didn't value women. He valued possession. To him, Zara was not a partner, just as Emma never had been. They were props in his ongoing play of power. But the audience had changed. The gala crowd was no longer entertained by Andrew's act. Investors exchanged wary glances. Socialites whispered that he looked desperate. Reporters ignored his attempts to draw attention. And in the chaos of Emma's triumphant arrival, Andrew Weston stood stranded. A man who once commanded rooms now reduced to background noise. Yet still, in his arrogance, he refused to believe it. He leaned into Zara, forcing another smile, as though sheer willpower could drag the cameras back. "We're still the stars here," he lied to himself. But deep down, a tremor of fear began to take root. For the first time, Andrew realized the spotlight could leave him. And once gone, it might never return. And as Emma's smile cut through the night like a blade, Andrew Weston's arrogance became the very rope tightening around his own downfall. The red carpet was no longer a stage for Andrew Weston. It had transformed into an arena, and the battle lines were drawn under the glare of relentless cameras. On one side stood Andrew and Zara, desperate, clinging to the shreds of attention. On the other side, Emma Weston, radiant and untouchable, with Alexander Blackwell at her side. The contrast could not have been sharper. Andrew's tuxedo, though immaculate, seemed to sag under the weight of his growing panic. Zara, once so eager to flaunt her beauty, now shifted nervously, her forced smile twitching with every flash. Meanwhile, Emma stood in velvet elegance, her posture regal, her expression calm but unyielding. Alexander exuded authority without a word, his presence alone enough to silence the rowdiest paparazzi. The crowd sensed the tension instantly. Reporters shoved microphones forward, their voices overlapping. "Emma, how does it feel to return like this? Mr. Blackwell, is this an official partnership? Andrew, do you regret bringing your mistress tonight?" The last question hung in the air like a knife. Andrew's face hardened and he tightened his grip on Zara's waist. "Excuse me," he snapped, forcing a strained smile. "Tonight isn't about petty gossip. It's about celebrating cinema and achievement. Let's keep the focus where it belongs." But the cameras weren't buying it. The lenses tilted away from him and locked on Emma, who remained poised, her hand gently cradling her belly. She didn't need to speak yet. Her silence alone carried weight. Alexander leaned slightly toward the microphones, his voice low and commanding. "Miss Weston is here tonight as a partner in a philanthropic initiative supporting mothers and children. She is not here to play anyone's shadow." His words were measured, deliberate, cutting through the chaos like steel. The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts, more flashes. The headline had written itself, "Emma Weston returns, backed by billionaire Blackwell." Andrew's composure cracked. His eyes burned with rage as he glared at Emma. "You think this little act will change anything?" he hissed, too low for the microphones, but sharp enough for Emma to hear. "You're still nothing without me." Emma turned to him slowly, her eyes steady, unflinching. For the first time in years, she did not shrink from his venom. "Then why," she whispered back, her voice steady, "are all the cameras pointed at me?" Andrew froze. Zara shifted awkwardly, her gaze darting between them, sensing the humiliation, but powerless to stop it. The confrontation escalated when Zara, desperate for attention, stepped forward. "Don't you all see?" she shouted, her voice sharp with insecurity. "She's just trying to play the victim. Andrew has moved on and she can't handle it. That's why she's parading around with him." She jabbed a manicured finger at Alexander. "Like some prize she didn't earn." The crowd gasped. The audacity of Zara's outburst only magnified the spectacle. Emma inhaled slowly, her hand pressing protectively against her belly. The humiliation of months past threatened to rise again, but this time she had steel in her veins. Alexander stepped forward, his tall frame casting a shadow over Zara. His voice was cold but calm. "Miss Weston doesn't need to parade. Her dignity speaks for itself. But what about you?" He gestured subtly at Zara, his gaze slicing through her composure. "What do you have besides borrowed jewels and borrowed time?" The silence that followed was deafening. Zara's face flushed crimson, her lips trembling as she tried to form a retort, but the crowd's murmurs drowned her. "He's right. She looks desperate. Emma's handling this with class." Andrew, red with fury, attempted to salvage control. He stepped in front of Zara and shouted toward the reporters, "Enough. This circus is beneath us. Emma is my past. Zara is my future. That's all there is to it." But his words sounded hollow, swallowed by the roar of cameras still focused on Emma. His declaration only highlighted his desperation, while Emma remained serene, untouched. Then, with the precision of a queen reclaiming her crown, Emma took Alexander's arm and stepped onto the carpet fully. The photographers nearly toppled the barricades, screaming her name, capturing every angle. She turned her head slightly toward Andrew, offering him a final, devastating smile. Not of malice, but of triumph. The symbolism was unmistakable. Andrew had tried to flaunt Zara as his victory. But the real victory belonged to Emma. She was no longer the discarded wife. She was the woman the world wanted to see, the woman the world now respected. Andrew tried one last time. He lunged forward, reaching for her arm, desperate to reclaim control. But Alexander moved with quiet authority, stepping between them, his gaze icy. "Touch her," he warned softly, "and this carpet will be your last stage." Andrew recoiled. His bravado shriveling under Alexander's stare. The crowd exploded, flashes blinding, reporters screaming for reactions. Emma remained calm, her hand tightening on Alexander's arm, her other hand on her belly. The image was iconic: strength, grace, and protection. The confrontation had reached its climax. The roles were reversed. Andrew and Zara stood exposed, desperate, and humiliated. While Emma and Alexander walked forward into the blaze of cameras, their power undeniable. As they moved deeper onto the carpet, Emma leaned close to Alexander and whispered, "Thank you." He gave a small nod, but his eyes never left the chaos behind them. And behind them, Andrew Weston stood frozen, watching the empire of arrogance he had built crumble under the weight of a single smile. The lights faded as Emma and Alexander slipped past the velvet curtain into the backstage area of the gala. The roar of cameras, the relentless shouting of reporters, the suffocating heat of spotlights, it all dulled into a low hum behind the thick walls. But the adrenaline that had carried her across the carpet drained the moment she stepped out of sight. Emma's knees trembled. She steadied herself against the wall, her velvet gown pooling like liquid midnight around her feet. She pressed a hand to her belly, her breath coming fast and shallow. The world had just seen her stand tall, radiant, untouchable. But behind closed doors, the cracks threatened to widen. Alexander noticed immediately. He guided her gently toward a quiet corner where a leather armchair waited, away from the flurry of stagehands rushing around. "Sit," he said softly, his voice a rare mix of authority and concern. Emma lowered herself into the chair, her fingers clutching the fabric of her gown. Tears burned at the back of her eyes. For months, she had told herself she was stronger than the humiliation, stronger than the betrayal. Tonight, under the lights, she had proven it. But in the silence of backstage, the weight of everything she had endured came crashing down. "I thought I was ready," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought I could face him without breaking. But when he looked at me, when he smirked like he still owned me." Her voice cracked, and the tears she had fought to hold back spilled free. Alexander crouched in front of her, his sharp suit a contrast to the vulnerability in his eyes. "You didn't break," he said firmly. "You walked through fire tonight and came out standing. Don't confuse pain with weakness. They're not the same thing." Emma shook her head, burying her face in her hands. Images flooded her mind, each one cutting like glass. Andrew whispering to Zara at the gala months ago, his mocking laughter echoing as he told friends she would beg to return. The pitying stares of socialites, the cruel whispers of being pregnant and broke. The nights alone in her tiny apartment, crying into her pillow while clutching her stomach. "I gave him everything," she sobbed. "My time, my dreams, my trust. And he made me feel like I was nothing." Alexander's jaw tightened, his hand resting gently over hers. "He took advantage of your love. That's not a reflection of your worth. That's a reflection of his weakness." Her tears slowed, but her heart still pounded. For the first time in public, she had stood equal, even above Andrew. But the scars of his betrayal were still raw. She worried that no amount of public triumph could erase the private devastation. "Emma," Alexander said, his tone shifting, lower, more deliberate. "You've already proven you don't need him. But if you want, I can give you what you need to destroy him completely." She looked up, startled. His hand slipped into his jacket pocket, retrieving a slim, sealed envelope. He held it out, the weight of its contents heavy in the silence. "What is it?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Proof," Alexander replied. "Evidence of Andrew's financial fraud. Shell accounts, falsified reports, bribes. I've had investigators on him for months. Not because of you, but because he's dangerous in my world. If this reaches the right hands, his empire will collapse overnight." Emma's eyes widened. Her pulse quickened. She stared at the envelope as if it were alive, pulsing with the promise of retribution. Her first instinct was hesitation. Why give this to me? Why not handle it yourself? Alexander's gaze softened. Because this isn't my war. It's yours. I could expose him, yes, but that would only make him another headline. You deserve the choice. You deserve the power to decide what happens next. Emma's hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. She held it close but didn't open it. The weight of it pressed into her chest like a heartbeat. With one decision, she could undo Andrew. Strip him of everything he had ever used to control her. But fear whispered in her ear. What if I can't handle it? What if I make things worse? What if this makes me just like him? Her voice cracked as she asked, what if I'm not strong enough to finish this? Alexander leaned closer, his eyes unwavering. Strength isn't about never doubting yourself. It's about what you do despite the doubt. You've already survived what most people couldn't. Don't let him trick you into thinking you're powerless. You're not. Silence fell between them. Heavy but sacred. Emma clutched the envelope, her tears drying as resolve began to flicker beneath the pain. She thought of her unborn child, of the world she wanted to bring them into, a world not defined by Andrew's cruelty, but by her courage. For the first time in months, her shoulders straightened without effort. She wasn't just holding evidence. She was holding her freedom. Stagehands bustled nearby, preparing the next round of arrivals, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in the corner. From the stage outside, the muffled roar of applause echoed. The night carried on, but inside Emma, something fundamental had shifted. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, stood slowly, and faced Alexander. Thank you, she whispered, for believing I still had a choice. Alexander gave a small nod, his gaze steady. The choice has always been yours, Emma. Andrew just made you forget that. Emma pressed the envelope against her chest, her heart steadying with each breath. For months, she had been defined by loss of love, of dignity, of security. Now, for the first time, she held the chance to define herself by power. She inhaled deeply, her voice clear. I'm not afraid of him anymore. And as she stepped away from the shadows of backstage, clutching the envelope like a sword, she knew the confrontation on the red carpet had only been the beginning. The real war, her war, was just beginning. And when Andrew Weston finally learned what was in her hands, he would realize that his downfall would come not from enemies in boardrooms, but from the woman he thought he had destroyed. The envelope sat heavy in Emma's hands, long after the noise of the gala had dulled into memory. Back at the private suite Alexander had arranged for her, the silence was deafening. She set the envelope on the mahogany desk and stared at it like it was a live grenade. For hours she circled it, her mind torn between fear and hunger for the truth. Finally, as midnight deepened, she broke the seal. Inside were pages of documents, each stamped with damning details. Wire transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, forged contracts with signatures not matching the originals, spreadsheets of bribes disguised as consulting fees. And tucked into the back was a photograph, Andrew shaking hands with a politician under investigation, his smug smile frozen in a flash. Emma's breath caught. She had known Andrew was arrogant, reckless, cruel. But this was more than betrayal of a wife. This was betrayal of an entire system. His empire was built not on brilliance, but on deceit. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages, each one a nail in Andrew's coffin. The man who had mocked her, humiliated her, declared she would crawl back to him. He was nothing more than a fraud propped up by lies. But then her eyes fell on one name, repeated across multiple documents, Blackwell Holdings. Her stomach tightened. That was Alexander's company. The man who had handed her this envelope, her unexpected ally, was somehow entangled in Andrew's corruption. She sat back, heart pounding. The question gnawed at her. Why would Alexander, of all people, give her evidence that also implicated his own corporation? Was this a trap? A setup to use her as a pawn? Or was there something deeper, something she wasn't seeing? The suite door opened quietly. Alexander stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He loosened his tie as if the weight of the evening clung to him, but his eyes sharpened when he saw the documents spread across the desk. "You read them," he said softly. Emma's voice cracked as she asked, "Why is your company's name in here?" For the first time since she had met him, Alexander looked unsettled. He approached slowly, pulling a chair across from her. "Because Andrew tried to drag me into his schemes. He forged deals with subsidiaries of my company to launder his money. We cut ties when we discovered irregularities, but not before he used my name as cover. He thought it would make him untouchable." Emma's eyes searched his face, desperate to know if she could trust him. "So, you're saying you're innocent in all of this?" Alexander leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. "Emma, if I were guilty, I would have destroyed this evidence. No one else has it. Not the press, not the government. Only you. Because I want you to decide his fate, not me." The room fell silent. His words carried weight, but Emma's heart wrestled with doubt. Was he truly giving her power? Or was this another powerful man trying to control her story? Her thoughts spiraled back to Andrew. He had once told her she was nothing without him, that she couldn't survive on her own. Was Alexander any different, or was he truly the ally she had prayed for on those lonely nights? Emma stood and walked to the window. The city glittered below, indifferent to her turmoil. She placed a hand on her belly, grounding herself in the life she carried. This decision wasn't just for her. It was for her child's future. She turned back to Alexander, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "If I expose this, Andrew goes down. But your name gets dragged through the mud, too. Are you prepared for that?" Alexander's gaze didn't waver. "My reputation can survive. His won't. But more importantly, yours will rise. The world needs to see who Andrew truly is. And it needs to see who you've become." The words struck deep. For years, Emma had been silenced, diminished, erased. Now she had the chance to reclaim her voice, not just privately, but publicly. But the price was high. Once she released this evidence, there would be no going back. Andrew would come for her with everything he had left. She sank back into the chair, the document spread before her like a chessboard. "Why me, Alexander? Why not just handle this yourself?" He hesitated for a long moment. Then his voice softened. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything. Years ago, I trusted the wrong person. A partner I thought was loyal betrayed me. I built myself back piece by piece, but the scar remains. When I saw you standing on that carpet tonight, facing down the man who tried to break you, I saw myself. And I knew you deserved the chance to win your war the way I won mine, on your own terms." Emma's throat tightened. For months, she had felt invisible, discarded, powerless. And now here was a man, one of the most powerful in the world, telling her she had the right to decide, the strength to lead. The truth was no longer just about Andrew's fraud. It was about Emma's rebirth. Her hand steadied as she gathered the papers into the envelope again. She looked up at Alexander, her eyes no longer clouded with tears, but sharpened with resolve. "Then it's settled," she said. "I'll expose him. But I'll do it my way. On my time. Not as Andrew Weston's ex-wife, but as Emma Weston. As myself." Alexander gave a small nod, a faint smile breaking through his usual stoicism. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." The twist had revealed itself fully. Andrew's corruption was deeper than she imagined, but so too was Alexander's faith in her. This wasn't about him swooping in to save her. It was about him placing the sword in her hands and trusting she would know how to wield it. As Emma closed the envelope, she whispered to herself, almost like a vow. "He thought I would crawl. He thought I would beg. But I'm going to rise. And when I do, the whole world will see him for what he is. And in that moment, Emma Weston wasn't just a woman betrayed. She was a woman preparing to end the empire of the man who had underestimated her for the last time. The morning after the gala, New York awoke buzzing with one name, Emma Weston. Headlines blared her return. Tabloids plastered photos of her stepping out of the billionaire's jet, radiant in velvet, hand resting on her belly. Blogs gushed about her poise. Talk shows speculated on her connection to Alexander Blackwell. But inside her suite, away from the noise, Emma stared at herself in the mirror. The reflection staring back was both familiar and foreign. Puffy eyes from the tears of the night before. A faint line of exhaustion across her face. Yet beneath the fatigue, something else lingered, a flicker of fire. She had the evidence. She had the world's attention. What she needed now was transformation. Not for the cameras, not for Alexander, but for herself. For years, she had been Andrew's accessory, styled to his taste, silenced when her voice grew too strong. She remembered how he once mocked her for choosing a bold red lipstick at a dinner. "You look like you're trying too hard," he had sneered. After that, she wore only the soft shades he preferred. That memory replayed in her mind like poison, and then dissolved as she reached into her makeup kit, picked up the exact shade of red he hated, and painted her lips with steady hands. It wasn't just lipstick. It was rebellion. Emma called Lena, her oldest friend, who had stood by her even when others turned away. Within an hour, Lena arrived with a team. A stylist, a hairdresser, a publicist. At first, Emma hesitated. The old Emma would have apologized for making such a fuss, but now she simply said, "Let's begin." The stylist, a sharp-eyed woman named Camille, circled Emma like a sculptor assessing marble. "We're not hiding you anymore," she declared. "No more safe pastels. No more polite gowns. You've been underestimated for too long. We're going to show them who you are." The transformation began. Hours passed in a whirl of fabrics, colors, and textures. Bold silhouettes replaced the demure dresses Andrew once insisted upon. Tailored blazers that screamed authority. Gowns that draped like armor. Jewelry chosen not for sparkle but for symbolism, pieces that told stories of resilience and rebirth. As Camille adjusted a sleek black gown, Emma caught her reflection again. This wasn't the fragile wife who once stood in Andrew's shadow. This was a woman stepping into her own light. But transformation wasn't only about appearance. It was about mindset. In the afternoon, Alexander returned. He found Emma at the grand table, documents spread before her, her laptop open. She looked up, her eyes sharper than he had ever seen. "I've been studying the evidence," she said, her tone calm, but firm. "And I see patterns." He wasn't just careless. He was arrogant enough to think no one would notice. That arrogance will be his downfall. Alexander studied her quietly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You're ready," he said. Emma shook her head. "Not yet. Ready isn't just knowing the truth, it's knowing how to use it. I won't just hand this to the authorities quietly. I want to show the world who he really is, publicly. In front of the very people who laughed at me when I was at my lowest." Her voice didn't tremble. It rang with conviction. Alexander leaned against the table, his gaze unwavering. That kind of move takes courage and strategy. If you do this, there's no turning back. He'll fight you with everything he has left. Emma closed the folder and met his eyes. "He already took everything from me once. I have nothing left to lose except my dignity, and I'm not giving that to him again." The plan began to form. Alexander made calls, securing connections. Lena worked with the publicist to line up interviews, appearances, moments where Emma could reclaim her narrative. Camille prepared a wardrobe that would make every step a statement. But the most powerful transformation happened quietly, in the solitude of Emma's heart. That evening, she stood alone on the balcony. The city sprawled beneath her like a galaxy of lights. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering softly, "I'm not just fighting for me. I'm fighting for you, too. You'll never grow up thinking your mother was weak. You'll know she fought. She stood, and she won." Tears stung her eyes, but they weren't the tears of despair anymore. They were tears of resolve. When she stepped back inside, Lena was waiting with a garment bag. "One last thing," Lena said, unzipping it to reveal a breathtaking gown midnight blue, stitched with subtle silver threads that glimmered like constellations. "For the gala in 2 nights, when you reveal the truth." Emma ran her fingers over the fabric. It felt like destiny. 2 days later, the transformation was complete. Emma emerged from the suite, Alexander at her side, Lena trailing proudly behind. The hotel staff froze as she passed, stunned into silence. The woman walking down the corridor was unrecognizable from the one who had slipped into anonymity months ago. Her hair was styled in waves that framed her face like a crown. Her gown flowed with elegance, commanding attention. Her stride was confident, measured, unapologetic. She wasn't Andrew's ex-wife anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was Emma Weston, a woman reborn. The cameras would see it. The world would see it. And most importantly, Andrew would see it. And when he did, he would realize the woman he once mocked into silence had returned, not as his shadow, but as his reckoning. The ballroom shimmered with opulence, every chandelier dripping in crystal, every table adorned with roses and gold-rimmed glasses. It was the annual charity gala, the event Andrew Weston believed would be his stage for redemption. He had been desperate to reclaim the spotlight after the disaster on the red carpet days earlier. Tonight, he told himself, he would silence whispers, remind everyone of his power, and prove Emma's return was nothing more than a fleeting spectacle. He arrived with Zara clinging to his arm, both dressed like royalty. Andrew's tuxedo was razor-sharp, his smile polished to perfection. Zara wore a crimson gown designed to demand attention. As they entered, photographers surged. Andrew flashed his trademark grin, confident once more. In his mind, the night was his. But as the guests settled and the orchestra played, a different kind of anticipation filled the air. Emma Weston was coming, everyone knew it. The whispers spread like wildfire. "She's here tonight. I heard she's going to speak. Alexander Blackwell is sponsoring the event." And then the doors opened. Emma entered, draped in the midnight blue gown Lena had chosen, its silver threads catching the light like a constellation. Gasps rippled through the room. She walked arm in arm with Alexander, her presence commanding without effort. Conversations halted. Glasses froze midair. Cameras pivoted in unison. Andrew's smile faltered. He tightened his grip on Zara's arm, whispering through clenched teeth, "Stay calm." But even Zara could feel the shift. Emma was the center now, and nothing Andrew did could compete. The program began. Speeches from dignitaries and philanthropists filled the stage. Andrew grew restless. His turn was approaching. He had prepared a grand address about innovation, legacy, and the future words he believed would drown Emma out. But destiny had a different script. When the host announced a special segment, the lights dimmed. A large screen flickered to life above the stage. The audience murmured in confusion as a title appeared, "A Legacy of Lies." Andrew's stomach dropped. The first image appeared, financial statements stamped with Andrew's signature. Next came spreadsheets showing laundered funds, photographs of him shaking hands with corrupt officials, clips of testimony from whistleblowers. One by one, the evidence unfolded like a meticulously crafted puzzle, damning and undeniable. The audience gasped, murmurs rising into shocked cries. "Is this real? How did this get out?" This will ruin him. Andrew leaped to his feet, shouting, "This is fake. Lies. A smear campaign." But his voice was drowned by the tide of scandal washing over him. Then Emma stepped onto the stage. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, echoing louder than the orchestra had minutes earlier. She stood in the spotlight, calm, radiant, her gaze sweeping across the stunned crowd. For years, she began, her voice steady but resonant, Andrew Weston built his empire on deceit. He told the world he was a visionary, a man of integrity. But the truth, she lifted the envelope and held it high, is that his success was purchased with lies, fraud, and betrayal. The room erupted again. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. Andrew shoved past chairs, his face crimson, yelling, "Stop this. She's my bitter ex-wife trying to ruin me." Emma turned her gaze to him, unflinching. "You told your friends I would crawl back. You told the world I was weak. But tonight, Andrew, it's not me crawling. It's you." Gasps swept the audience. Alexander rose from his seat, his silent presence a wall of strength behind Emma. Zara tugged on Andrew's arm, panicked. "Do something," she whispered. But Andrew's empire was crumbling in real time. Investors in the room exchanged icy looks. Donors whispered about pulling funding. The very people who once worshipped him now recoiled as though he carried a disease. Emma continued, her hand pressing lightly to her belly. "This is not just about me. It's about every person who has been silenced. Every truth buried under money and influence. I will not let my child grow up in a world where Andrew Weston is celebrated as a hero when he is nothing more than a fraud." The audience burst into applause. It began with a few hesitant claps, then swelled into thunderous approval. Emma stood taller, her tears glimmering but not falling. Andrew lunged toward the stage, his voice raw. "You'll regret this, Emma. I'll destroy you." But before he could reach her, security blocked his path. From the side of the room, two men in dark suits appeared, flashing badges. Federal agents. The evidence Emma had presented had already been forwarded to authorities. "Andrew Weston," one agent declared, "you're under investigation for financial fraud and conspiracy." The crowd erupted in chaos, half gasps, half cheers. Zara stumbled back, her face pale, no longer clinging to Andrew, but inching away as though he were contagious. Emma watched silently as Andrew was cornered, his protests growing weaker. For years, he had paraded his power, convinced he was untouchable. Tonight, under the same lights he once craved, his downfall was broadcast for all to see. She turned back to the microphone, her voice calm. "Power built on lies always collapses. Tonight is proof. And let this also be a reminder, women are not weak when they refuse to stay silent." The applause was deafening now. Guests rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, cameras flashing like lightning. Emma stepped back, Alexander moving beside her, his hand steady on her arm. Together, they left the stage as Andrew was escorted out in handcuffs, his empire of arrogance crumbling into dust. Backstage, Emma exhaled, trembling with the release of years of pain. She turned to Alexander, whispering, "It's done." He nodded, pride flickering in his eyes. "No, Emma," he said. "It's just beginning. Tonight, you didn't just end Andrew. You began your own story." She pressed a hand to her belly, tears of relief spilling at last. For the first time in years, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of victory. And as the ballroom roared behind her, Emma Weston knew the world would never again mistake her for weak, because she had written her triumph across the very stage where Andrew tried to erase her. The echoes of applause from the gala lingered long after Emma had left the stage. The image of Andrew Weston, once untouchable, being led away in handcuffs, was already circulating across every news outlet in New York. By morning, it would be splashed across the world. But for Emma, the night was not about the spectacle. It was about release. For the first time in years, she felt free. Back in the suite Alexander had arranged, Emma sat quietly on the balcony, wrapped in a silk shawl. The city stretched below her, restless and glowing, but her heart was calm. She touched her belly, whispering softly, "We did it." The door behind her opened, and Alexander stepped out. His jacket was gone, his tie loosened, but his presence was steady as ever. He didn't speak at first, simply stood beside her, hands in his pockets as if giving her space to breathe. Finally, he asked, "How does it feel?" Emma let out a long, shaky laugh. "Like I can finally breathe again. Like I've been holding my breath for years, and tonight I exhaled." Alexander nodded. "Justice has a way of doing that." But Emma shook her head. "It's more than justice. It's closure. For so long, I thought I was powerless, that I was just the woman he left behind. Tonight, I proved to myself and to everyone that I'm more than that." The next morning, the world confirmed it. Headlines screamed across every paper. Andrew Weston exposed. Emma Weston emerges as voice of strength. Morning talk shows praised her courage. Social media lit up with hashtags celebrating her resilience. She had gone from whispered pity to global admiration overnight. Meanwhile, Andrew's empire unraveled. Investors abandoned him. His company's stock plummeted, and lawsuits piled up. Zara, who had once clung to his arm, vanished into the shadows, erasing traces of him from her social media. The man who mocked Emma for being just a housewife with a belly and no prospects was now alone, disgraced, and powerless. But Emma didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate his downfall. Instead, she focused on what came next. Within weeks, she launched the Weston Foundation for Mothers and Children, using funds donated by Alexander and other supporters inspired by her story. The foundation offered legal aid, shelters, and resources for women trapped in cycles of control and humiliation. Women like her. When reporters asked why she started it, she said simply, "Because no woman should ever feel voiceless. Not when she has so much to give." The work gave Emma a new sense of purpose. She wasn't Andrew's ex-wife anymore. She wasn't just a scandal. She was a leader. And as the months passed, something else bloomed quietly between her and Alexander. It wasn't rushed, wasn't forced. It grew in the small moments. His steady presence at her foundation events. The way he listened when she doubted herself. The rare but genuine smile he reserved only for her. One evening, after a long day of foundation meetings, Emma found herself laughing freely for the first time in years. Alexander watched her, his eyes soft. "I like that sound," he said quietly. She blushed, remembering how Andrew had once mocked her laugh as too loud, too silly. But Alexander's words were different. They weren't possession. They were appreciation. For the first time, Emma realized she could love again not because she needed saving, but because she was finally free. The final piece of closure came on the day her divorce was finalized. Standing in court, she faced Andrew one last time. He looked hollow, his once proud frame slumped, his eyes vacant. The judge signed the papers, and just like that, their ties were severed. Andrew glared at her, whispering, "You think you've won? You'll always be nothing without me." Emma didn't flinch. She met his gaze calmly and replied, "No, Andrew. I was nothing with you. Without you, I'm everything." She walked out of that courtroom with her head high, the sound of her heels echoing like a victory march. Months later, Emma gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Holding him in her arms, she felt every scar, every tear, every sleepless night fade into the background. The life she had carried through pain and humiliation was now her greatest triumph. She named him Hope, because that was what had carried her through when everything else had crumbled. At the christening, Alexander stood quietly beside her, his hand brushing hers as friends and supporters gathered. Emma smiled, not because she needed him to complete her, but because she chose to let him in. Her story, once a tale of betrayal, had become one of rebirth. And so, under the glow of candlelight, Emma gave her final message to the gathered crowd. A message that would echo across every platform and into the hearts of women everywhere. I was told I was weak. I was told I would crawl. I was told I couldn't survive without him. But here I am, standing stronger than ever. To every woman who has been silenced, humiliated, or abandoned, you are not weak. You are not voiceless. You are not alone. Don't let anyone tell you your worth. Write your own story. And never forget, when a woman rises, the whole world takes notice. The applause was thunderous. Tears streamed down cheeks. Cameras captured the moment. But for Emma, it wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about healing, about legacy, about proving that out of the ashes of betrayal, something stronger could be born. Andrew Weston's downfall was complete. His empire dissolved, his reputation ruined, his name synonymous with disgrace. But Emma's story had only begun. She had risen. She had reclaimed her dignity. And she had shown the world that women, when pushed down, do not stay down. They rise higher. And with her child in her arms, her foundation flourishing, and her future bright, Emma Weston's final triumph was clear. She had not just survived, she had conquered. So that's where Emma's story closes, my wonderful friends. And if you're still here with me right now, it means something in this journey touched your heart in a way you didn't expect. Maybe it reminded you of your own battles. Or maybe it gave you hope that strength can be born even from the deepest pain. The truth is, life will test us. We all face betrayal, disappointment, and moments where we feel powerless. But as the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Emma's story reminds us that even when the world tries to define us by our lowest moments, we always have the choice to rise again. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not shouting, not fighting, but quietly rebuilding ourselves into someone unbreakable. Seneca wrote, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. And isn't that what Emma showed us? That through her trials, she didn't just survive, she transformed. So, let me ask you, what part of you is waiting to rise again? What scar are you carrying that could one day become your strength? If you feel that spark, hold on to it. Nurture it. Let it guide you forward. And if this story touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe so more hearts can hear this message. Because maybe tonight, someone else needs to be reminded. They are not broken. They are becoming.